This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Forget the frustration of picking commerce platforms when you switch your business to Shopify, the global commerce platform that supercharges your selling wherever you sell. With Shopify, you'll harness the same intuitive features, trusted apps, and powerful analytics used by the world's leading brands. Sign up today for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/tech, all lowercase. That's shopify.com/tech.
Where faith matters. The Rev and the Rabbi. Talk Radio 77 WABC.
Welcome back. I'm Rabbi Joseph Potasnik.
And I'm Reverend A.R. Bernard.
Reverend, I had the privilege of attending the opening of the Anne Frank House exhibit at the Center for Jewish History here in New York. That's located at 15 West 16th Street, and really an extraordinary exhibit, a must-see, and many people are coming to see it. And with us today is the executive director of the Anne Frank House in Amsterdam, and that's Ronald Leopold. Mr. Leopold, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
So talk about the genesis of the Anne Frank House there, where you are in Amsterdam.
So the Anne Frank House in Amsterdam opened its doors in 1960, May 3, 1960. But it was a difficult story in order to get those doors open that day, because in 1956, the Dutch had almost demolished the house. It was a time when people wanted to forget about what had happened in the past, and everyone was focusing on the future. Well, in the meantime, of course, the Diary of Anne Frank had been published. The first publication was in 1947 in Holland, and then in 1952 here in the United States. Became hugely successful play in 1955 on Broadway, which won all the theater prizes that year. And then in 1959, the film, the George Stevens film, The Diary of Anne Frank. Mm-hmm. So it was actually here in the United States, you could say that the origins are for opening the Anne Frank House to the public, while the Dutch, to be very honest, didn't much care about that place, didn't much care about the house, as by the time a Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Netherlands wrote to an American visitor to Amsterdam who wanted to visit the house, he said, well, it's not open, sir, because to be very honest to the Dutch, this house has no historical cultural value. This was 1956, the Netherlands.
You know, I'm curious because Anne Frank was Jewish, of course, as you know, but her story has been interpreted and shaped by Christian perspectives. Because as a young Christian years ago, when I converted to Christianity, you know, one of the early books that were handed to me was a Diary of Anne Frank. And at first I thought she was a Christian until I realized what the story was about, and how that played out. I understand that Dutch Christian resistance played a critical role in helping Jews like the Frank family hide from the Nazis. What do you make of this relationship that her story has with the Christian community?
Well, I think a very important element, of course, is the fact that many Christians in the Netherlands were involved in saving Jews and helping them to go into hiding. And until today, I'm attending ceremonies of the righteous among the nations from Yad Vashem who are honoring those families. And of course, now it's second and third generation. But let me tell you a story about a pastor in the eastern part of the Netherlands. He's one of the main helpers in the Netherlands who help Jewish children hide in those areas, which is very close to the German border. And members of his community, some of them, also maybe because of the nearness of to Germany, were members of the National Socialist Party in Holland, and nevertheless helped hiding Jewish children. Just because the pastors asked him to do so, and that's what they did, and that's how some of these children survived. And I think this is, when you look at the these righteous among the nations, as they are being called, the ones who have helped Jews and go into hiding. What always strikes me is they are ordinary people. They are ordinary people. They are just following their moral compass that points into the right direction. They are doing what their pastor or whatever religious leader was by the time told them to do. And I'm always impressed by that, because ordinary people, you ask them for help that's what happened, right? You ask them for help, and just like the woman who helped the Franks during those 2 years in hiding, they just immediately say, "Of course I'm going to help you. Of course I'm going to help you."
I remember.
And you have to make that decision in a split second. There's no way that you say, "Oh, come back next week. It's fine. We'll see. We'll think about it." No, you have to do this in a split second.
I remember years ago, they were interviewing some of the rescuers, those who hid Jews, and they said, "Others didn't. Why did you?" And he said, "Because it was the right thing to do." They didn't go to any theological explanation. They didn't go to any, this is what I was taught from generation. They just said, it's the right thing to do. End of story.
It's interesting that you bring that up, Rabbi, because one of the strong influences on post-Holocaust theology was Anne Frank's story. Many Christian scholars and leaders, reflected on how for centuries Christian anti-Semitism helped create an environment in which the Holocaust could happen. And her story had great influence on revisiting that history and casting a new theology around the Holocaust and the Jewish people in relationship with Christians.
Well, Mr. Leopold, talk about the family that hid Anne Frank. Was it Geiss?
Well, the family was in hiding in her father's business premises, and the woman who was her father's secretary, her name is, and I will pronounce it in Dutch, Miep Gies. So she organized the help. Her father had asked her if she would be willing to help them throughout the time that they were in hiding, and obviously they had no idea how long that would be. In hindsight, we know it was more than 2 years, but by the time they had no idea, and this woman, she said, "Of course I'm going to help you. Of course I'm going to help you." And so she and 3 other employees of her father, and together with 2 other people, have been helping them for those more than 2 years until they were arrested on August the 4th, 1944. And it's humbling when you hear her saying now, when she was sharing her memories and her, how she looked back at that time, and how it's heartbreaking when you hear her say, "We failed. We failed. They were caught at the end." Well, she was obviously not responsible at all for what has happened, but that failure dominated the rest of her life. Well, of course, she was an incredible, courageous woman. I mean, she put her own life on the line in order to save that of others. So, and she's an example, as being we're not just a museum in Amsterdam, we're also an educational organization, of course, also the reason why we're bringing this exhibition to New York. And she's an example for these young people. Doing the right thing.
You use the term righteous among the nations, and I think it was at the official Holocaust Memorial that over 27,000 individuals made up this righteous among the nations, individuals who were willing to give their lives in service of trying to save Jewish families. Do you present that? Because I haven't had the opportunity. I look forward to, but is that presented in the museum?
Part of the museum in Amsterdam is dedicated about what we call the helpers. We tell their stories. They tell their own stories. They tell their own memories of what what brought them to help them, and also 2 of the male helpers who were then sent after they were arrested to concentration camps in the Netherlands. both survived. But it was really, and it's really an example for our visitors. And we present them in a space that you enter after after you went through another space, where we present the people who made the other choice, the wrong choice, who have collaborated with the Nazis, and who helped the Nazis in order to make sure that, they would achieve their goal of, as they call it by the time, making the country Judenrein, clean of Jews. So we offer the different perspectives in our museum of people collaborating, making the wrong choice, and helpers, incredibly brave people doing the right thing.
Yeah, we're speaking.
Rabbi and I'm sorry for cutting you off, Rabbi. I'm just intrigued by this whole thing. Rabbi and I talk about the fact that a lot of the attacks were on Jews because they were Jews, whether they were living in Israel or outside of Israel. Even today, one woman comes to mind, if you're familiar, Edith Stein. She was a Jewish-born Catholic nun, and she was arrested and murdered in Auschwitz. Even though she was, born Catholic, she was still a Jew. So it didn't matter how she identified religiously, the fact that she was a Jew. And that's the question, why is it specifically the Jew that people go after? Rabbi?
Well, Mr. Leopold, I'd like to hear your answer. I think history paved the way for the Jew to be the obvious target, going back to early, the development of Christianity, seeing the Jew responsible for deicide. And then from there, it was the Jew who was the moneylender, the Jew who was in control of the media, controlling society. I mean, any negative label you wanted, you could easily put on the Jew, because of what was been said in previous generations. Mr. Leopold?
Yes, and then what was added to all that were, of course, the racial elements of this, and the so-called racial laws, the Nuremberg laws, that defined who the Nazis considered to be Jewish or not, regardless of their faith, their choices, who they were. And I think and then also talking about the exhibition here in New York, I think one of the most powerful elements that we are presenting here is a school class of Anne Frank, 1935, and is 6 years old, together with other 6-year-old children. The school class, a little over 30 children. 15 of them were Jewish, and 10 of them were murdered for the single reason that they were Jewish. The others survived by going into hiding and having the fortune to survive, wearing so fortunate to survive. But we know no one was safe, just for the very simple fact that they were being considered as Jewish according to the racial laws of the Nazis.
Yeah, with Edith Stein, she was born a Jew. And she converted to Catholicism. Right. None of that mattered. The fact is there was Jewish blood there, and because of that, she had to be destroyed. You know what I find interesting, Mr. Leopold, is that Anne Frank in her writings is very positive about the human spirit, that in spite of it all, she sees goodness in people. So I think she would want you to tell the story of the helpers. And she would find it inappropriate to hide that story because there are some good people. But here's this young person, a victim of hatred, the most heinous form of hatred, and yet she sees that humanity has elements of goodness. Where does that come from?
It's a very difficult question to answer, but I think part of the answer could be the way she was raised by her family, a German Jewish family, who was, lived for centuries in Germany, who was a very educated, cultural family. And I think if you look at her diary, it was really a girl that embraced life. She was, And I think that's also the power of the diary. It is not just the book of a victim of the Holocaust, which he obviously was at the end, but it's also very much this a young girl full of dreams, full of hope, full of talents. She was an incredibly talented writer. And I feel that the disparity between this girl embracing life on the one hand and being so full of everything that makes us human, while at the same time knowing that that she was just one of 1.5 million Jewish children that were murdered for the single reason that they were Jewish. I think that disparity is speaking to us, and the fact that we can go beyond the immense tragedy of what has happened and still see the human parts of that. And that's also what we tried to do in the exhibition here in New York, to humanize the victims, to humanize that school class, to humanize all those children. It's a tribute not just to Anne Frank, it's a tribute to all those children that were murdered for the single reason that they were Jewish.
I'm curious to know if there's any surviving family or generations beyond that tie back to Anne Frank, and are they involved in some way?
We, excuse me, we were very privileged to have a third generation here from the Frank family. These were the grandchildren of Anne Frank's favorite cousin. And they were here with us during the opening event of the exhibition, sharing their family memories, growing up in a family with such a huge legacy, while at the same time having this, engagement, and you see the way they try to shape their own lives in the shadow of that family history, and in their way, I think, being an example for young people, showing the engagement, inspired by history, inspired in their case and by their family history, in order to make sure they will do the right thing and they will serve as an example for others to do the right thing.
Mr. Leopold, you had a school there at the opening, Xavier, Catholic school, a neighbor of the Center for Jewish History. What do you want to accomplish by the exhibit? Are there going to be follow-up educational programs so you don't have people coming to an exhibit and then it's over? What's the continuing education process?
So what we try to do is to touch people's hearts. With this story, to learn, to invite them to learn about the past, but also very much to encourage them to learn from the past, to show them what human beings are capable of. It serves also as a kind of a mirror for us, for humanity, and make sure that they will become part of a solution in order to make sure this will never happen again. It is not enough just to learn about history. You should reflect on that history, and hopefully they will respond in their communities, wherever they live, whether it's their school class or their sports club or the environment where they grew up in, just to make sure that they will help us to make sure it will never happen again.
You served prior to your appointment to the Anne Frank House with the Dutch General Pension Fund for Public Employees. Talk about legislation regarding war victims that you were involved in implementing.
So there is a scheme in Holland from the Dutch government providing special pensions and allowances to World War II victims. And I had the privilege to be the director of that organization before I entered the Anne Frank House. And as different as these organizations might be, for me, it was actually a logical step, because what we do at the Anne Frank House is to remember and to educate. But the first thing you need to do, of course, is to take very good care of those who went through that history, who lived through that history, and who are trying to restore their lives, and who we all have the obligation to help them in order to make sure they can restore their lives after what was done to them. So I feel it was a logical step after having done that for many years, then making the step towards the Anne Frank House, where we remember them, we remember their history, and where we try to educate young people about what has happened during the Holocaust.
So, Mr. Leopold, you have the Anne Frank House in Amsterdam. How would you describe the state of anti-Semitism in the Netherlands? I know there was some ugly incidents that took place. Was it right after a soccer game? It was in Amsterdam.
In Holland, like in other countries, we've seen a rise in anti-Semitism for a longer period of time. Before November 7, the incidents you just mentioned, before October 7, the attacks, we've seen it for a longer period of time, and not just in the Netherlands, also in other countries. We've very recently learned about what happened in Sydney, Australia. Mm-hmm. We feel that our responsibility is huge. We're working together with the National Coordinator of Combating Anti-Semitism in the Netherlands and with our colleagues in the field and the memorial sites in the Netherlands. We're working on a law to make sure that it becomes mandatory for each and every school kid to go to a memorial site or to the National Holocaust Museum that opened last year in Amsterdam, or to the Anne Frank House for that matter. We're producing educational materials and tools for schools. It's a huge challenge, but on maybe a bit of an uplifting note, we also see at the same time that the interest in the story of Anne Frank is rather increasing than diminishing. Knowledge, of course, is becoming a problem, but there's still a huge interest. And when I tell you that half of the 1.2 million visitors to the Anne Frank House are younger than 30, there are hopeful signs out there as well.
Mm-hmm. Rabbi and I talk often about how as generations emerge and time moves on, things like the Holocaust, if they're not remembered, memorialized, they're soon forgotten. We know history becomes legend, legend becomes myth. What are you doing to connect to this generation, this story? You say there's an emerging interest. And is the Transmitting Anne Frank to Gen Z a documentary that you did for that purpose? Tell us a little bit more about it.
So I think one of the greatest challenges that we are facing right now, and we as Anne Frank House, but also the colleagues in the field, is this: how are we going to mediate the memory of the Holocaust as we go into the 21st century and towards fourth, fifth, sixth generations born after the war? They live in a different world. They grow up in a very different media landscape, and we know that. Like the classical exhibition you go to a gallery and you go to the next gallery and you go from one showcase and you go to another showcase and you look at an object and read a text about the object. It's not going to work. It's not working very well anymore. We need to do it differently. What we've tried to do with this exhibition is by using video, photo, animation, very different ways of presenting a story is also, in a way, our answer to that challenge. We hope that this will, and what we see right now during the first days that the exhibition is open, that it will appeal to those young generations, it will resonate with them, and then hopefully we will be able to set an example for how we can mediate the memory, how we can tell the story, and how we can mediate the memory of the Holocaust as we go towards new generations.
Ronald Leopold, Executive Director of the Anne Frank House. It's an exhibit you must see at the Center for Jewish History. As I mentioned, 15 West 16th Street. I know there was a tremendous demand for tickets, and so many young people are coming to see the exhibit, and if there's going to be hope for the future, I think Anne Frank would say, find those young hearts. Will translate into helping hands as well in dealing with this crisis. So thank you for all you've done. And we look forward to, I was telling the Rev, we got to bring the Cardinal and Reverend Bernard and a host of other interfaith leaders to see it, to talk about it, because it can't just be looking back. As you said, you learn about history, but you have to learn from history.
Right. Excellent. Great conversation. Thank you so much, Ronald Leopold, for being on the program.
Here's John Katsimatidis Jr.
Are you paying too much for your home or business heating oil? My family owns and operates United Metro Energy, and we can offer you a lower price and better service right now. No other heating oil company can match our tremendous buying power. We own our own refinery, our own storage tanks, and the largest fleet of company-owned trucks.
We get a 20-cent a gallon tax credit with United Metro Energy's biofuel.
We're a community-conscious, family-run business.
We're here for you 24/7.
Contact me anytime.
Email john@umecny.com.